Oh, it got serious all of a sudden. Welcome. How are we all doing this morning? Welcome to day 3 of PAX Australia. We are very, very excited to be back here in the physical flesh realm with all of you beautiful fleshy people. Start off weird. Hands up before we start. Hands up if you've been to a Press X panel before.
Oh,
holy wowzers.
That's wonderful.
That's awesome. That's so cool. Hands up if you haven't, and that's absolutely fine. We love having new people here as well. Thank you so much for coming. If you've never been here before and don't know what you're in for, let's hope we live up to your expectations.
Science, mainly. Science, mainly, that's the aim.
Science, yeah. So, Press X to Science. If we could get some slides up. Oh, we do have them up. Oh.
We just have advertising.
On the foldbacks as well.
That's
fine. Press X to Science, that's us. Who are we? We have 3 people on our panel today, our regular co-hosts. We have Megan Pusey.
Thank you.
We have Phill English. And myself, Tim Young. Now, there is a correction. We have made an error already. This is not our panel today. Our panel today actually consists of Dr. Megan English.
To clarify, we are not married.
Megan Pusey, just confirmed recently. We also have Dr. Phill English.
You're getting the 2 doctors confused.
And me. And that's fine. So, this is actually our 9th time here at PAX Australia. These are all the different topics that we have covered. It's been an interesting run. And this year, we are trying something a little different. But before we start, we do want to say that we acknowledge that the land that we are on today is unceded land, and that we are on stolen land. And we are from Perth, Bulu in WA, and Perth sits on the land of the Whadjuk Noongar people. And I have a small message in Whadjuk Noongar to recite to you all today, and that is Ngalak Karaj Kulin Mort Balap Mulya Nijak Bujak Ngalak Nin. And that is just acknowledging that we are on First Nations lands and that we acknowledge the families of the Kulin Nation who have lived here forever and will continue to live here forever, because that is the way things are. And it's really, really important. Thank you. Yes, it's really important that we do this because we are talking about science, and science is something that doesn't belong to one type of thinking or one way of knowing or understanding. Science has been happening here for over 60,000 years, and it's really, really important to acknowledge that before we start, especially because we are 3 white people on a stage. So, we are here to talk a little bit about hidden figures, and we were inspired to call it hidden figures because we wanted to look at the hidden people and the hidden mechanics behind games that utilize science in really, really interesting ways. And of course, Hidden Figures being the incredible movie showcasing the black women who actually made the NASA Apollo missions work in the first place, and the stories that they didn't get to tell at the time. Have you seen the movie? Some of us? If you haven't yet, absolutely fantastic movie. Highly, highly recommend. Please do go out and see it. But I'm going to start off by giving it up to Dr. Phill English.
Thank you. Thank you, Tim. Alrighty, so... Excuse me. So yeah, just a disclaimer before we start. I am extremely sick. I apologise for that. I know my voice sounds atrocious. About the only way that it could sound worse is if it was played by Chris Pratt. Topical. So today I'm going to be talking about just one game. It's an indie game. It was initially made by one developer. It kind of famously started quite small and ended up selling like millions and millions of copies. It's got kind of, quite basic, pixelated, blocky graphics. It's easy to start, hard to master. It's got quite a bit of depth to it, to the game. And it's got an absolutely banging soundtrack. Does anyone know roughly what game we're talking about? Oh my God, so many. Yeah, that's right, it's Minecraft. No, it's not, it's Tetris. So today we're talking about NES Tetris specifically, and even more specifically, we're talking about developments in the NES Tetris the classic Tetris World Championship. Now, this is a very niche topic, but this, I think, out of all the stories that we saw in the last couple of years, this one really exemplified to me like a community coming together to try the scientific method and try and push techniques to the absolute limit. Hopefully not too many of you have already seen the story. If you have, it's another refresher. But so in last night at about 9:30, when I was extremely hopped up on pseudoephedrine, trying to finish off these slides, I realized that not necessarily everyone in the audience is going to know what Tetris is. So this is Tetris. This is a version of Tetris called J-Tetris. It's a JavaScript-based Tetris. We won't hold that against it. And so I wanted to just give like the 4 basic principles. Heads up, I was again hopped up on pseudoephedrine, so they're fairly basic. So blocky fall down. Your job is to make blocky fit good. Then the blocky go bye-bye. And then blocky get bad, go fast. Now I do know that the blockies aren't called blockies, they are called tetronomers, and I want to take a moment just to acknowledge that fact, because it is the one time I have ever been able to tell Tim something about a video game that he did not know already. And so I take small victories where I can. So they are called tetronomers, not blockies. I'm going to keep referring to them as blockies because I think it's more fun. So in NES Tetris, and specifically in the NES Tetris like World Championship, the main problem is not what you and I face, the blocky get mad, go fast. That's not an issue. They're so good at seeing the blocks and seeing where they should be in their play field that that's not the problem. The problem is that actually getting the blocks to the side. So top to bottom, not a big deal. Getting them to the side, that's the big deal. So if you are a NES Tetris World Championship player, you probably want a controller something like this. This is the Xbox Adaptive Controller. We've talked about it in a couple of our previous talks, actually. It's a really awesome piece of kit. It's made by Microsoft, which, I use them. I use Microsoft products in my day-to-day life. I hate myself, but this is a really great controller. This is what championship players would love to have, because it's got big buttons, very comfortable. You can do your own custom inputs. You can remap buttons, all that kind of stuff. That's what you would want. What they have is the NES controller. This is sometimes referred to as the I think it's called the dog bone controller, which I think is being kind to dog bones, to be honest. It's got the world's tiniest buttons. The action on the button is terrible. The D-pad is very slippery. It's got hard edges. If your brother's ever flung a NES controller at your head, you know about it. Not happened to me at all. But yeah, essentially, what the problem with these world champions trying to get the blocks to the side actually comes from kind of the interaction between the game and the controller. So the controller itself is really hurting their ability to do this. So I'm just going to run through a few of there's 2 main techniques, and then the third technique, which was the one that was the result of basically scientific analysis by the Tetris community. So I'll just run through. So the original way of playing Tetris is basically how you and I would play Tetris. So it's called DAS. That stands for Delayed Auto Shift. And there's another term that you need to know, which is called Auto Repeat Rate, ARR. So I've just got a little animation here that shows you kind of what is happening with delayed auto shift and auto repeat rate. If you've ever used a PC, you pretty much know what these are. So DAS, the delayed auto shift, when you press down, like the space button or any button on a keyboard, you know how it like does one input and then it pauses and then it starts doing the rest of them? That's the delayed auto shift. So there'll be some time that has been, I think you can set it in Windows, that it'll wait before it does repeats. And then the auto repeat rate is how quickly it does the repeats after that. So in NES Tetris, to get the block to all the way to the side of the playing field, you hold it, you press, and then it's got 16 frames before that first repeat, and then it's got 6 frames per following repeat. So you're kind of already setting the mark that you need to get to if you're going to be doing something other than DAS, is pretty much 10 times per second. So 6 frames, 60 frames per second, 10 frames per second. And the NES Tetris does play at 60 frames a second, so it's pretty elite. So the problem is that when you're playing at these elite levels, there's this level 29 kill screen. So Tetris, a lot of old games have these kill screens. Basically, they're screens that the developers didn't really want you to get past. And in arcade machines, Pac-Man famously has a kill screen where kind of half the screen goes kind of garbled and glitchy and shitty. And people have worked out the ways to get past it. But in Tetris, for a long time, there was no real way of getting past level 29. You kind of had to get your scores as high as you possibly could before then because there was no reasonable way for you to get the blocks to the side to be able to keep going, basically. Enter the contender, hypertapping. Yes. So hypertapping, and I've got a little video here. It's kind of grainy, kind of blocky because it's a close-up of someone's hand from a YouTube video. But you can kind of see here, it doesn't quite capture what is happening, but you can see how fast that person is pressing the buttons there. Now, the way that hypertapping works is that, oh, I'm sorry, I should say, it came to prominence in 2017, 2018. Didn't really see competitive play. And the reason why I put weird flex but okay is basically what people are doing is, and if you have biceps, which I don't, but you kind of flex your bicep really hard so that your fingers like you know when you're picking up like heavy things and sometimes your arms will kind of shake a little bit. I don't have that problem, but you get that little shake. They're essentially deliberately doing that so that they get this. They use their thumb as a jackhammer to kind of press it really, really fast. So greater than 10 times per second. They usually get between 15 and 20 times per second on the buttons to be able to just zoom those pieces across to the right. Now you can see, again I did a shitty little animation, but you can see that the purple version of the Tetris piece here is the minimum advantage that you get. So that's moving at 10 movements per second, but it's already getting an advantage because it doesn't have to wait for that 16 frames at the start, right? So it only goes up from there. So someone that can do hypertapping can, theoretically and in reality, can get past level 29. And so that gives you an advantage over everyone else in the competition that cannot. So this was famously, very famously, well, I don't know how many people have actually heard of it, but famous to me. Famously, this was used in 2018 in the classic Tetris World Championship by a guy called Joseph Saley, who's a young fella, I think he was only 17 or 18 when he won the championship. He pushed beyond the kill screen and was actually able to take out the championship by doing hypertapping. Now, the problem with hypertapping is that physical exertion is actually very hard for a lot of people, and not everyone can do it. And so this is where the science comes in. The community that popped up around this, so the video between Joseph Saley and, what's his name? I have notes. Jonas Neubauer. He was basically the end boss of the Tetris Classic World Championship. He'd won, I think, 7 out of 8 of the previous ones, and he was beaten to come second to Joseph Saley. So the community kind of came together and they're like, well, okay, well, hypertapping is great, but surely there must be a better way of doing this that allows more people to enjoy Tetris and be competitive at Tetris. And because this video of Joseph Saley and Neubauer was so widely shared, and actually a lot of the teenagers and younger people that got into Tetris after that blamed it on the fact that the YouTube algorithm served it up to them. Because for whatever reason, it got tagged as like an e-sport or something like that. And so it served it up to them and they were like, oh yeah, Tetris. That's pretty cool, good soundtrack. And so a lot of people got into it. And so you get these Discord servers starting up, you get whole communities that are dedicated to finding out, okay, well, hypertapping is cool, but what can we do that's more accessible, less uncomfortable? Because as we've noted, the Nest controller is bad, very, very, very bad to use. So yeah, so how do we actually overcome these limitations? And this is where the science comes in. Brace yourselves. This is wild. Okay. This is how people play competitive Tetris now. So essentially what you are doing is rather than trying to press down a button really fast at a high frequency, you turn the entire underside of your controller into one big button that you can flick, and you put your finger so that it's just barely resting on these directions on the controller, and then you roll. They call it rolling, right? You roll your fingers over it. Now this was basically something that had been kind of theorized for a long time. There's guys that used to play like arcade machines where rolling was much easier on an arcade machine because you got those kind of nice buttons, right? And no one had really worked out how to do it on a Nest controller because, as mentioned, terrible. And so I just think this is such a perfect example of people looking at something that was not Tetris has been around for 30 plus years and no one had thought to do this. Now, essentially, now that they have rolling, and you can see, I've gone through that. So originally discovered or showcased, I guess, by a guy called Cheesefish, or also known as Cheese. And you can kind of see how much of an advantage this gives you. They get between 20 and 30 movements per second using rolling. And so you just fly across to the edge of the space, and you can put the pieces basically wherever you want. So now in the World Tetris Championships, rather than having to just post a high score to get into the qualifying rounds, you have to max out multiple times in order to actually qualify. We've gone, I think in 2016, I think the highest score was less than 999,000, right? So the max out score for Tetris is 999,999, and then rather than having to just get a high score, you have to do that multiple times in order to qualify. The person who won last year maxed out 12 times. So he got to essentially 1 million points 12 times in the time, the qualifying time that you had. So you've just seen this huge leap in kind of the technology of playing Tetris, all because you had this community and this scientific analysis of like, how can we look at how we play and completely think outside the box and become better players and have a greater community. And essentially, it kills the kill screen. People have gone to level like hundreds. They're no longer, the level 29 is no longer any kind of barrier. And so people I think the game starts breaking at some point. It doesn't know what to do. It does random colors. Things just start getting a little bit weird. It gets a little bit like Inscription-y almost, where just random stuff starts happening. So that's kind of, I guess that's where I'll leave it. Like, I just find it extremely encouraging that you have all these young people that picked up this game that's so old and managed to find something new by basically doing science, by basically following the scientific method and having this hypothesis. So that is a game that is extremely old and hasn't really evolved much. We're going to go over to games that have evolved quite a bit and involve evolution with Megan. Here we go.
You say that, but this game I'm going to talk about is 26 years old.
Oh, nice.
So it's not too much further off Tetris, I guess.
That's mortifying.
Yeah. So
We old.
I wanted to talk a little bit about Pokemon. Hang on, I'll hide that for a sec. As you can tell. And the original Pokemon was released in 1996. A very long time ago, on the original Game Boy, Pokemon Red and Blue. I did start playing then, had a bit of a lapse in the middle there, and have recently started to play again. And I noticed something interesting. There were a lot of Pokemon I did not know anymore. We originally started with 151 unique Pokemon. Ignoring the game that hasn't been released yet, which is coming out, I think, next month, does anyone know how many, or the total number of unique Pokemon that exist? 500? 800? Too many to remember all their names. I cannot remember all their names.
Just enough.
So you can see that the blue line is like how many new unique Pokemon were released in each game, and the red line showing the total number of unique Pokemon. And we are up to 905 unique Pokemon already. I cannot remember 905 pieces of information anymore. And you'll notice a funny thing, after Black and White, instead of getting about 100 new Pokemon each game, it dips down to about 70 to 80 new Pokemon. I imagine it's quite a design challenge to come up with that many new Pokemon each game, considering also that the time you have to develop the game also you'd be under a lot of time pressure. So a lot of Pokemon are inspired by real life. The original creator, Satoshi Tajiro, I think his name is, was inspired to create the game by his love of insect collecting, so it's not surprising that some Pokemon are based on animals. So I have a game for you this year. In previous years we did Guess That Pokemon, so we're going to play it again, but this time instead of showing you the silhouette, which was too easy, you were all too clever, I'm going to show you the animal or plant that inspired the Pokemon, and you can guess.
This is a really hard one.
Thought I'd warm up the crowd with something easy first. This is the eastern swallowtail caterpillar, and if you hadn't already guessed, inspired Caterpie. I'll give you another relatively easy one. The cedar waxwing bird inspired, yes, indeed, Pidgey. See the black markings on the face are very, very similar. This one's an interesting one. It's the glass frog, but the tadpole stage in particular. You can actually see through the skin to its intestines. Inspired Poliwag and its subsequent evolutions. This one is a manta ray, which actually has a symbiotic relationship, that means both parties benefit, with the remora fish, which sort of sits underneath and hangs around on the belly of the manta ray. Yes. See, oh, too easy. There is a Pokemon called Mantine, which is essentially the manta ray, and Remoraid, so even the name is similar. They also exhibit that symbiotic relationship in the Pokemon world. We've got coral, which I'm not a biologist, so I had to look this up to get it straight, which is technically an animal which has a symbiotic relationship with a kind of algae, which inspired Corsola, which looks like this. And then if water temperatures rise, the algae can die, and then they leave behind, and the animal dies, and it leaves behind a hard sort of exoskeleton in some types of coral. And in the Galar region of Pokemon, you can find this version of Corsola, which is a ghost type as well, I believe. We have...
So sad.
This particular plant is called the pitcher plant, which inspired Victory Bell. It is a type of carnivorous plant, which means it's meat-eating. So it has this sort of really thick, sickly, sweet sort of syrup sitting at the bottom of the cup, and the walls are really sticky, so when flies or insects come in, they pretty much can't get out and end up being digested by the liquid down the bottom. And in the anime, in the TV show of Pokemon, Team Rocket member James has a Victory Bell at some point, and there's a running gag of Victory Bell trying to eat James, and it kind of gives new meaning to that running gag. We have Vileplume, inspired by the corpse flower, which is called that because it smells like rotting human corpses. If you come from Adelaide, I believe they have one at the Botanic Gardens that you can go and see. Although why you'd line up to see... Why you can go and smell. Why you would line up to go and see that, I'm not sure. Pokemon, as well as being inspired by real life, Pokemon is now inspiring other artists to create some amazing work. So I really wanted to share this particular one. There is a book you can buy from... I have it in my notes. The artist Christopher Stoll. You can buy his book called Pokenatomy, where he has reimagined what the insides of Pokemon might look like if they were real. Like, how would they function and work if they existed in real life? And he's done this for a number of different Pokemon. And it was an interesting challenge that kind of reappeared when they made the Detective Pikachu movie, because all of a sudden they had to 3D rig and animate and model Pokemon for the first time. And they had to really think about, well, how heavy is it? What should its fur look like? How does it really work in 3D, which had not quite been done in that way before. So there were some interesting challenges around making that movie as well. There is another artist called R.J. Palmer who does some really amazing work around realistic-looking Pokemon, but I wanted to show you two of his pieces he made where he took a Pokemon, in this case Vaporeon, up on the left of the screen, and reimagined what the Pokemon might look like if it underwent real evolution under hundreds of thousands of years. And in this case, Vaporeon lives in the ocean and might end up looking something a bit like an orca whale. And this was my other favourite one, So the Pokemon inspiration on the left is essentially a T-Rex, Tyrantrum, and chickens are kind of long descendants from dinosaurs. And the animal inspiration for this is a very special breed of chicken from Vietnam that I had not heard of before, and I wanted to share with you what the real chicken looks like. So that is a real breed of chicken. Apparently it's very rare.
He's a chunky boy.
Sorry?
He's a chunky boy.
Yeah. So there was that artwork there where they reimagined real evolution. All of the regions that Pokemon is set in initially were based off of regions found around Japan. So a lot of the geography and what you see in the game is inspired by real life here as well. Tim added this in. He thought the picture looked a bit like Dialga.
I feel like it's just me.
The new game coming out next month apparently is based on Spain, and I really think they're missing out on an opportunity to base a game on Australia, which has not been done. I can't claim credit for this work. This is by an artist called Vivink Art. You should definitely check out their work. About a year or two ago, they released this fake image for Pokemon Yeah Nah, and they've actually designed about 100 Fakemon, so they're fake Pokemon, based on Australian animals. I wanted to share just one of my favourite ones, inspired by the ibis. I looked through all of the bird Pokemon, all of the real bird Pokemon from the games. None of them are inspired by the ibis. So Nintendo, please make an ibis Pokemon and a game based on Australia. Close your eyes if you don't like spiders. The fake Pokemon Ibin evolves into a 2-meter tall spider because Australia. But yeah, the other ones are really fun. You should definitely look them up. Moving on from Pokemon, some quick updates from the world of technology, looking at VR and immersion. Some researchers in Carnegie Mellon University, I believe, made this get-up, which sits on the bottom of a VR headset, and it shoots little puffs of air at the bottom half of your face. The skin around your lips is actually really, really sensitive. So it's essentially mouth haptics.
Something we never asked for.
Yeah.
Especially in the context of what's coming next.
So there is a little demo video that you can see where they show some of the demos they made for people to try this out. The first one is fine. It's they're riding a motorcycle in VR and you feel the wind on your face. Okay. This next one is a little bit more questionable. So yeah, if you don't like spiders, maybe just look away for a minute or close your eyes. I don't think there's any sound, so that's okay.
Watch her mouth. It's real visceral.
It's just the eternal grimace.
Exactly.
So I don't know why they decided to simulate spiders crawling on your face with the puffs of air, but they did. I don't think they stopped to ask, should we? And one last thing for me, a quick update on the Doom running community. So I think it was last year online, we talked a little bit about this community that does Doom running, where they essentially try and get the classic game Doom running on random pieces of hardware because, just because. So this isn't a public ATM. They actually had this ATM in their garage. Don't know where it came from. But
Totally legit.
Totally legit. They got Doom running on an ATM. They got it running, this was one of my favourite ones, running on a digital pregnancy test. And, you know, in school, obviously you can get lots of games on your graphics calculator, and now you can play Doom. The ones that have happened in the last year or so, someone got Doom running inside of Doom.
Doomception.
work in tech, and someone wanted to rickroll their friends in tech, and they got Doom running on Grafana, which is a sort of dashboard, like a dashboarding kind of piece of software.
This is essentially the graphics are being plotted like it's in Excel. Like this is online Excel Doom.
Yeah. I was excited about this one. I thought this one was a really good one. Turns out it was photoshopped, unfortunately. So they took the photo on the right, which showed the blue screen of death on a McDonald's kiosk, and someone photoshopped in the Doom and pretended that they had done this. So I would be excited to see this actually happen, but it hasn't been done yet. And this was, I think, my new favorite one from this year. Doom running on a graphics calculator powered by potatoes. It's on YouTube. They needed a lot of potatoes to have enough electricity to power the calculator. And they had cooked or boiled the potatoes as well. And by the time they had enough potatoes laid out, I think it was about 45 kilos worth of potatoes in their garage, they had started to go moldy. So you can see in the image there's some mold going on there.
That is a video.
Oh.
I think it's a video. Yeah.
Check out the video on YouTube as well. They generally try and explain how they got it working, and it's quite interesting to see how creative they get in getting around the hardware limitations.
Might need a couple more potatoes to get GLaDoS going, though.
Yeah. And the last example which was actually on ABC News very recently, a security researcher, I believe, from Australia called Sick Codes, took the brains of a John Deere tractor. It wasn't in the tractor when they were doing this, and hacked it essentially to play Doom, trying to prove a point about vehicles with computers for brains. Obviously, we need to protect them and remove the vulnerabilities, but also people should have the right to repair. John Deere and Apple, typically not known for doing that very well.
Very diplomatic way of saying it.
They have different views.
But also, tractors are a very key part of our food supply chain, so if they were all hacked and couldn't work anymore, that would be very, very bad. Although Doom running is kind of funny, in this case they were trying to prove a point of, actually, well, if I can do this, then other people might be able to do it too, so let's try and fix that problem. And I think, Tim, you had something, you added to this story, you found an interesting video on the tractor brain. I'll pass to Tim.
Thank you. Also, thank you, Megan, for an incredible section. What's also really interesting here is that it wasn't just enough to hack the John Deere to play Doom. Sick Codes collabed with another hacker in New Zealand, and she made a farm mod for Doom so that you could farm Doom in your tractor. I think there's a beautiful symmetry to that.
I think they should add this to the farming simulator esports scene.
Absolutely. But also maybe to like Farming Simulator 2023, where you can play Doom in your tractor in your game in your tractor. And how many levels deep do we need to go at this point? But it's also a biosecurity issue. Because if you think about it, tractors that are controlled by computers like this, if they are able to be controlled autonomously or remotely, there's nothing stopping a tractor within a GMO field, for example, being controlled into a non-GMO field and disrupting that crop, or going from a diseased field to a non-diseased field. So these are actually really, really important tech questions being asked as well. But moving on from Doom, but also not quite moving on from Doom, and then we're going to go back to Doom. Spoilers. We wanted to look a little bit as well about how these games actually work, because there is a long-running argument online amongst a very small community of very passionate people that Doom is not actually 3D. And this is true. It's also not true, but it is true. And we're going to find out why. This also comes from the discussion around this game, which you might recognize as Wolfenstein 3D. Wolfenstein 3D is not actually a 3D game. It is a 2D game. So what you're seeing here is on the right-hand side, that is what Wolfenstein 3D actually looks like. It is just a 2D map with textures printed onto the ground. And this little line that's coming out is doing what's something called ray casting. So it is calculating the distance between the player character and the edge of that wall, and then turning that distance into a vertical height, and then skewing that vertical row of columns, or that vertical row of pixels, also called a column, into these vertical lines on the screen. It's also why you can't have a ceiling or a floor in Wolfenstein 3D, because it doesn't actually exist. It's just a color printed onto the background. So Wolfenstein 3D is absolutely not 3D, and that's super, super interesting. And it's interesting as well because this was done on hardware that just simply couldn't handle the calculations for 3 dimensions. Doom is a different question. Doom is technically 3D, but it's not. What it's doing is it's doing that same process, 2D map, lots of textures, and then it is implementing a special type of code called binary space partitioning, or BSP. And what this is doing is it's saying, I want to take the whole map and draw a line through it, turning it into 2 triangles. And in those triangles, how many vertices are there? So how many points where lines meet? So if you vertices where lines meet, and where vertices expand out, and you connect them all together with lines, you get a plane, and then you connect those planes together and you get a polygon. So you went from 1 dimension to 2 dimension to 3 dimension. Cool? What it's doing here is it's looking for how many vertices are available. And if there is more than 1, it cuts it in half again and makes 2 more triangles. And then it does it again and again and again until every single area has just 1 vertex plane in it. And this allows the computer to then go, I don't need to render anything that's not in that small section, and then turn that into a 3-dimensional space by adding a height offset. So what you end up with is something that looks like this, where it is taking each of these 2-dimensional BSP subsections, applying a height modifier, and then rendering that vertically on the screen. So it's pretending to be 3D. But it is 3D because it is actually rendering it in height. So it is, but it isn't. And that's really, really complicated, but the maths that was required to do this was actually originally done for the space program, because everything is done for the space program originally, back in the 60s, and it wasn't designed for visualization. It was designed for minimizing and maximizing the creation of shapes and spaces for aerodynamics and rocket programs. So it is 3D, but it's not. It is very interesting, but what is really, really cool about this is that this was all done and realized and remade for Doom specifically on hardware that just simply would not have been able to run it. And the way that you can tell that it isn't technically 3D, but it is, but it isn't, is that you can't go underneath anything. You can never be on a space where you could be above yourself and below yourself at the same time. So have a look on, if you're ever back playing Doom on a tractor one day, you can't actually go. You can move up and down vertically, but you can never go underneath anything or above anything. It doesn't exist, which is really super interesting. So that's one way we have managed to make interesting games work on systems where they shouldn't be able to. The other way is simply just to brute force the game. This was very famously done on the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, possibly the best system of all time.
Correct. And rounded controllers this time.
Rounded controllers, less sharp, pointy edges, so you don't have to fling them at Phill. Or you can, but it's going to hurt less. So what they did is they actually had to add extra bits of RAM to the cartridge to get some games to play. So this is a Super Mario 3 cartridge in particular. That extra work RAM at the top, which then has to be controlled by the MMC3 mapper in between, so it's trying to tell the system which piece of memory to use at which time. It only knows about one of them at any given time. The system doesn't know that there are 2 sets in there, so the MMC controller actually has to flick between them each time it wants to change which level it's looking at, and that's a super interesting way of doing that. Of course, doing that also means that you have to have a battery installed because it requires more power, and eventually you get to a point where it's too much, right? You're doing way, way too much to try and get this whole system to work, so you need to go back to software hacks. So it's this kind of flip-flop model where you're going between hardware hack, software hack, hardware hack, software hack. One of the really interesting ones here on the 64 was Zelda. We all remember Zelda. We all remember Zelda, right? Oh yeah. Sorry, you went really quiet. I got very nervous. So Zelda looks fantastic, and actually for the Nintendo 64, it looked really fantastic. Like, it looked really, really good. Specifically, the clouds in the skybox looked really amazing. The way that they moved in the background, and that's because Zelda is doing something really, really uncanny. The sky in Zelda is not a skybox like you would normally think of it. So a skybox normally is a cube that is wrapped around the player, but in Zelda, the skybox is a cube in the distance that Zelda looks. That's Zelda. I've done it again. You were going to make fun of me, and I wasn't going to do it. That Link looks at.
Got him.
And it slowly rotates to give the appearance of the clouds moving. So the game is not actually rendering a skybox, it's rendering a cube in the background, behind the background, so it's an extra layer of background. And it's one of the reasons why the game looks as amazingly good as it does. Of course, in this mode, it looks horrible, something that I'm sure Chris Straub has dreamt of. But it's wild. And this is still happening. All these kinds of weird hacks we're still having to do on modern games. One of the most recent ones that's come out recently is Kirby and the Forgotten Land. And the way that this game is changing things is that because it's in 3D for the first time, you don't actually have to hit the enemy. The game is figuring out what looks good enough on the screen to constitute a hit. So it's not doing hitboxes. It's not checking to see if you've hit the character. It's checking to see if it looks to you like you've hit the character and letting you have the win, which I think is pretty cool. And I need this in all of my games, please. I just need a win. Yeah, right? If this was Smash Brothers, I would play it. Because Phill likes Smash Brothers, and Phill is good at Smash Brothers. And I don't play with Phill. So, this leads me up to what I really, really wanted to talk about. So all of this has been the preamble for what I think is one of my favourite games. And for the first time ever, it's not Star Citizen or Kerbal Space Program.
Shock
It
horror.
is, I know, right? It is a game called Homeworld 2. Any fans of Homeworld 2? One really excited person. I thank you. You are my validation. 2, excellent. We're growing every day.
Tim, I played Mass Effect, so I would be prepared for the space references this year. And now you've chosen a game I have never heard of.
So why am I really, really excited about Homeworld 2? Well, for one, it came out in 2003, I think. Homeworld 1 came out in 1996 or 98, somewhere in that sort of spectrum. And they both used a really, really interesting technology that was only sort of rediscovered recently. These backgrounds, these vistas in Homeworld 2 look amazing. In fact, they are impossibly good. They simply cannot be rendered at that level of fidelity on computers back in 1998 through to 2003, circa. And so, if it's impossible, and yet it's being done, how is it being done? And this took a little bit of backward engineering. What is essentially happening is an artist is painting these beautiful, beautiful backgrounds, these huge nebulas and accretion disks in star systems. They're painting it, and it's then being scanned into a computer. And that computer is then mapping it out, looking at all the colours on the screen, and then giving those colours a number. And then it says, how different is that number to the one next to it? Not so different, let's call it the same colour. If it is quite different, let's call it a different colour. And then it maps out all the areas that have contiguous colours, so colours that are touching other colours that are the same as it, and it gives them all the same area, and then where those colours differ, it creates a vertex. And what you're left with is a very interesting vertex map. So this is being rendered in real time on a 2000 computer making these kinds of images. So what you're looking at is not a painting or a texture, it is actually just lots and lots of well-matched triangles. And so that's super, super interesting. This was back-engineered by Simon Schreibt in Germany, and it's really interesting. If you map these out onto a sphere, you create, so from this texture, which has so much detail, I mean, the center is really, really detailed and looks beautiful, and the dynamic range of the lighting is incredible. But if you actually map this onto a sphere, what you're getting is this. So if this was all equally detailed, you would have a perfect sphere. As it is, every point on that sphere is the same distance away but because there are an uneven number of points across the sphere, it deforms the sphere and makes it look like this, a bit wonky and like a rotting apple, I think it was described to me as. And so this is really, really cool, because it allows for an incredible level of detail and depth that you simply would not be able to get normally on these systems. It also has the effect of making the background appear like it's in the background. A lot of modern games, you'll actually notice sometimes the background is way too detailed and way too close to you, and it kind of pulls you out of the experience. But in space, things are really, really far away. And we know that because we can see it. But also, when we look at space and we make space games, we like to do this stuff, right? It looks really cool, but how real is this? Is this what space actually looks like? Obviously not with the alien artifacts, but you know, the nebula and the stars and all those other cool things. And this is an argument that's been asked a lot. Now, the most realistic space game of all time, can anyone take a guess? Kerbal Space Program? Star Citizen, all right. No Man's Sky? EVE Online. Why is EVE Online the most accurate space game of all time? Because as a space scientist, this is what we look at. Not so much stock values, but numbers and plots and graphs. This is what space exploration and space science actually looks like. And so if this is the most accurate depiction of space, the way that we interact with space games is all wrong. Luckily, our hero that we didn't know we needed came to the rescue. And they've partnered with EVE to give us the tools to properly interact with our beloved space science. This is not an April Fool's or a joke. This is real. EVE has partnered with Excel to bring Excel into EVE to properly do all of the number crunching and maths you need to play EVE. If this doesn't make you want to play EVE, you're probably correct. Exactly. You're putting a hat on a hat at this point. So, but it's true. You know, I'm not a particularly big fan of Excel myself, but this is the tool that they're actually genuinely releasing to the community very, very shortly. And it does look really, really cool. Real space science looks like this. This is some of my work, some of my research on pulsars from way too long ago. But it doesn't look sexy, it's not good. I mean, even the funny red one looks kind of cool, I guess, but it's only kind of cool if you're me. And as far as I'm aware, no one else is. But we've got new tools to do more science on space, like this one. This is the James Webb Space Telescope. And it's just gone into orbit around the moon at a point called the Lagrangian orbit, which is a gravitational saddle. We can, if you want to know more, find me later. I will. Yeah, that's a whole different panel that they will not register.
He will never stop talking.
Just don't know. So the James Webb Space Telescope has gone out into space and is able to look at things in detail that we've just simply never seen before. So here is a really interesting example of that. On the left, you've got the Hubble field. On the right, you have the Webb field. And in the middle, you have a mix mash of the two. And you can see that there is just so much more data and information coming from the Webb telescope. It is at a slightly different frequency. It's in infrared rather than in optical. But that's okay because of science. And you have all this detail that you simply couldn't see before. And a lot of it is really genuinely surprising to us. We weren't expecting to see it. This is the photo that is like the really sexy one. This is the one that NASA released along with all the fanfare. It's also my phone wallpaper at the moment. And it's beautiful. Like it's really, really beautiful. You've got these incredible blues and reds. But the question is, how realistic is this? This is what Webb sees. And you know, Webb is, yes, in a different color spectrum. So these are fake colors, but they're not fake colors because we know what the real colors should look like based on the infrared spectrum. And then we've got ones like this. And this is an image I'm going to come to later because I actually think that this image is way, way more exciting than the other images. Because what you're looking at here, all those stars in the middle, which is about 100,000 stars, are inside that nebula. That nebula is over 100,000 light years across. It is huge. So we're getting all this new detail into how we see space that we didn't expect, we didn't understand before, and it's making us sort of think about how we represent space in games. The other thing we've done is we sent another spacecraft out into space. This one, very, very short-lived. It was called DART, and its job was to what's the movie? Armageddon. Smash into an asteroid to break it and see what would happen. So this is actual video of the spacecraft approaching. This is sped up at 10 times the real speed. Very shortly, it will switch to a real-time approaching asteroid Dimorphos and Didymus. And then these are in real time. Those pixels at the top were the last ones to be sent back from the craft before it did impact the surface. And we wanted to see if we could move the asteroid, if we could save the Earth if we needed to redirect the asteroid, which is what the R in DART stands for. The rest is...
Wait. I want to do something. Wait for it. Wasted.
That's the real kill screen, isn't
Yeah,
it?
exactly.
We observed this from ground-based observatories. This is what it looked like. And you'll notice that that big ejector plume that's coming out the front of it is moving at the same speed as the original speed of the asteroid, or a little bit faster, which is really, really interesting, and it's got lots, that looks pretty much like we expected it to. Big puff of cloud, like taking a stone and throwing it in the sand at the beach and seeing a big poof come out at the end, right? However, we got JWST to look at it. Still a baby telescope, so it's still learning to look at things, and it got this image. It's okay, I guess. But because we're getting really, really good at this, we're now starting to create spacecraft that actually have their own camera crew. So the DART mission had a small satellite that it dropped off from its back, a little piggybacking satellite, and this spacecraft followed behind it and took photos as it wasted itself. This is scientists. We shouldn't be allowed to name things.
No, just space scientists.
Sorry, space scientists. I don't know, the biology, that was a whole different... we learned some interesting new phrases. This spacecraft is called LITIACube, the Light Italian CubeSat for imaging of asteroids. And it has 2 cameras on board, and those cameras are called Luke and Leia. Luke standing for the LITIACube Unit Key Explorer, so it's an acronym within an acronym, and Leia also the LITIACube Explorer Imaging for Asteroid. That could not be more forced if you tried. But these are the same people that brought you Black Hole and Red Dwarf, so we're not the greatest. And it took these incredible, incredible images. So this in the background, that little halo over there, that's the impact site. That's the asteroid being struck. The one in front is the bigger of the two. I think it's calling it Dimorphos, but I think I've got the name wrong. It doesn't matter. It's a tiny one. But then it took this photo, and now we start to see a lot of things that we weren't expecting to see at all. All this, you can kind of see it, this little filamental structure that's weaving out. We weren't really expecting that. We were expecting a fairly uniform, like we said before. And then another photo again really shows it off now. These crazy filamental structures, which suggest that there are other fields at play. There are other things that are causing it to move in this unexpected manner. So it looks like filamentation might be much more observable at smaller scales as well as large scales. That same filamentation that we see in giant nebula like this. This is the Tarantula Nebula, by the way, just to keep the theme of the spiders going for the rest of the panel. So we asked the question, what would this look like if you were actually there, if you were inside this nebula? Like I said, it's huge, 1,000 light years across. So what would it look like? Well, unfortunately, it wouldn't look like this, because there is something called the inverse R-square law. Everyone's favorite law, right? So the inverse R-square law essentially says that the further away from something that you get that is emitting, it decreases by 1 on R squared, which means that it gets very, very weak very, very quickly. So you can see that first one, there's all those photons striking a bit in the second one, that same size square is getting half or 1 on R squared, the number of photons hitting it, and then 1 on R square hitting it again. So it gets very, very dim very, very quickly. And you can see this if you put a, don't do this, but if you put a torch like right up to your eyeball and then took it really far away, like that's really bright, and then far away is like meh, right? So don't do it, but it's science. Don't do it.
This is why you're not a doctor yet.
This is why I can't see out of my right eye. So, what would it look like? Well, it would actually look really, really dark. So we wouldn't be able to see these giant, beautiful nebula. Or would we? Now that we're seeing this filamentation structure, we know that some of this stuff is really, really densely packed together. So most nebulas are like 1 atom per 10 square meter. So this, not a nebula. This is a cloud. It's a lovely cloud. I like this cloud, but it's not a nebula. But some parts of the nebula might be a little bit like this. This filamentation, probably magnetic fields causing it to spiral. Oh, now it's a really, I really like this cloud now. Can you still see me if I like... damn. All right. So, if you can see this filamentation structure, you might actually be able to see some amount of filamentation in the sky if you were physically there. That's cool. Would it be beautiful red and blue? Unfortunately not. Our eyes aren't particularly sensitive to those colours. Our eyes see green really, really well. That's probably something to do with photosynthesis. I'll ask my biology friends. But that's what we kind of think at the moment. So what you would see is maybe a green sky with faint, thin, green filamentary structures, and I have tried to recreate that for you today. That's what it would look like to be inside a nebula. I think that's pretty cool. Oh, that's me. That's not cool. So this is the image we want to leave you on, because I hope that it leaves you with a little bit of wonder and a little bit of thought about, what would happen if you asked some of these questions and you tried to find out. Because that's what science is all about. It's about trying to ask a question, maybe a question that has been asked before, and maybe you've been told that it wasn't possible to be answered, but that's also almost always not true. So from the three of us, we are Press X to Science, and we are more updated images of us. We've aged a lot over the last couple of years. We've gotten hairier, not Megan.
I got a dog.
Yeah, well, you brought your own hair.
Yeah.
So, thank you very much for coming. We hope to see you again next year in person, because we want to keep this good thing going. And we'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yay.